What happens when absolute power meets unbreakable will? When a man who treats human lives as entertainment finally faces someone who refuses to be prey? This is the story of how one night in the southern wilderness changed everything, and why some hunts end with the hunter becoming the hunted. If stories of courage against impossible odds captivate you, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. The year was 1847, and in the heart of Georgia's most remote plantation territory, Governor Thaddeus Blackwood had turned cruelty into an art form. His estate, Raven's Hollow, sprawled across 15,000 acres of dense pine forests and murky swamplands, the perfect hunting ground for his most twisted passion. Every month, when the moon was darkest, carriages would arrive at Raven's Hollow carrying the South's wealthiest plantation owners, politicians, and businessmen. They came not for cotton deals or political discussions, but for what Blackwood called his midnight sport, human hunting. "Gentlemen," Blackwood would announce from his mansion's grand balcony, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never been told no. "Tonight, we hunt the most dangerous game of all." The rules were simple and horrifying. An enslaved person would be given a 30-minute head start into the forest. If they could survive until dawn and reach the old stone bridge 5 miles north, they would earn their freedom, if caught. Well, no one had ever made it to the bridge. Blackwood's guests would gather in the mansion's trophy room, sipping aged bourbon beneath mounted deer heads and bear pelts, placing bets on how long the hunt would last. The shortest had been 12 minutes, the longest 3 hours and 47 minutes, a record that Blackwood himself had set. "The key," Blackwood would explain to his guests, his pale blue eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction, "is understanding that fear makes them predictable. They always run toward water, always seek the thickest brush, always make the same mistakes." His hunting party consisted of 6 men on horseback, armed with rifles, and accompanied by a pack of bloodhounds trained specifically for tracking humans. Blackwood rode a massive black stallion named Reaper, and he carried an ornate hunting rifle passed down through 3 generations of his family. The enslaved people on Raven's Hollow lived in constant terror of being selected. Blackwood chose his prey based on perceived defiance, a look held too long, work done too slowly, or simply his whim on any given night. The selection process itself was psychological torture, as he would walk through the quarters, studying faces, before pointing his ivory-handled cane at his chosen victim. "You," he would say, and that single word was a death sentence disguised as a game. On this particular October night, the air was thick with fog, rolling in from the nearby Altamaha River. Blackwood's guests had arrived earlier that evening: Senator Morrison from South Carolina, Judge Whitmore from Alabama, plantation owners Henderson and Caldwell from Mississippi, and 2 wealthy merchants from Savannah. They sat around the mahogany table in Blackwood's dining room, gorging themselves on roasted duck and discussing their latest acquisitions, both human and material. The conversation was punctuated by cruel laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses filled with imported wine. "Thaddeus," Senator Morrison said, wiping grease from his chin, "I must say, your little entertainment has become the highlight of my month. My wife thinks I come here for political discussions." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The beauty of it," Judge Whitmore added, "is the perfect legality. They're property, after all. No different than hunting rabbits on your own land." Blackwood smiled, but there was something different in his expression tonight, a hunger that went beyond his usual sadistic pleasure. "Gentlemen, tonight will be special. I've selected someone unique." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the slave quarters, where lantern light flickered behind crude wooden shutters. "For months, I've been watching one particular specimen. He arrived 6 months ago from a failed plantation in Alabama, a giant of a man, nearly 7 feet tall, built like a fortress. Sounds dangerous, Henderson observed, suddenly less enthusiastic. That's what makes it perfect, Blackwood replied, turning back to his guests. I've been waiting for the right moment, studying him. He thinks his size makes him untouchable, that his silence makes him invisible. Tonight I prove that no man, no matter how large, is beyond my reach. The enslaved man Blackwood spoke of was known simply as Samuel. He had arrived at Raven's Hollow in chains, purchased from a bankrupt plantation where he had been considered unmanageable. At 6 feet 11 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds of solid muscle, Samuel was indeed a giant among men. But his true strength wasn't physical. It was the unbreakable spirit that burned behind his dark eyes. Samuel had been born free in Pennsylvania, the son of escaped slaves who had built a small farm in the mountains. He had lived the first 18 years of his life as a free man, learning to read and write, helping his father work their land, and believing in the possibility of a just world. That world had shattered when slave catchers found their farm. Samuel's parents were killed, defending their home, and he was dragged south in chains, his freedom papers burned before his eyes. For 12 years, he had endured the hell of slavery, moving from plantation to plantation, his size making him valuable, but his spirit making him dangerous. At Raven's Hollow, Samuel worked in the lumber crews, felling massive pine trees with an efficiency that impressed even the overseers. But he never spoke unless spoken to, never looked directly at white faces, and never showed the rage that burned constantly in his chest. He had learned to hide his intelligence, to appear simple and docile, while his mind planned and calculated. Samuel knew about Blackwood's hunts. Every enslaved person on the plantation knew. They had all heard the screams echoing from the forest, had seen the bloodhounds return with torn clothing between their teeth, had noticed when someone disappeared and never returned. On this night, as Samuel lay on his straw mattress in the cramped quarters he shared with 8 other men, he felt a familiar chill of premonition. Through the thin walls, he could hear the laughter from the big house, could see the glow of lanterns as Blackwood's guests prepared for their entertainment. "Samuel," whispered Moses, an elderly man who slept on the adjacent pallet. "You've been too visible lately. The way you look at things, the way you carry yourself, that devil's been watching you." Samuel said nothing, but his massive hands clenched into fists. He had been careful, so careful, but perhaps not careful enough. He thought of his parents, of their farm in the mountains, of the freedom he had once known and lost. If Blackwood chose him tonight, it would not be like the other hunts, because Samuel had a secret that the governor didn't know. He had been preparing for this moment for months. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a small knife he had crafted from a piece of broken metal, sharpened on stone during countless nights. More importantly, he had been mapping the forest during his work details, memorizing every trail, every creek, every hiding place. If chosen, Samuel would not run in panic like the others. He would not seek the false hope of the stone bridge. He had a different plan entirely, one that would turn Blackwood's twisted game into something the governor had never imagined. The sound of approaching footsteps outside the quarters made every man inside freeze. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, they could see the glow of torches and hear the jingle of keys. Blackwood was coming to make his selection. Samuel closed his eyes and steadied his breathing. After 12 years of slavery, after watching countless friends disappear into the night, after swallowing his rage and hiding his strength, the moment of reckoning was finally at hand. The door to the quarters swung open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Governor Blackwood stood silhouetted in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by the torches held by his overseers. He wore his finest hunting attire, a deep green jacket with gold buttons, leather boots polished to a mirror shine, and his ivory-handled cane gleaming in the flickering light. Behind him stood his guests, their faces flushed with wine and anticipation. "Good evening, boys," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the false warmth of a snake oil salesman. "I trust you're all resting well after your hard day's work." The enslaved men remained motionless on their pallets, eyes fixed on the floor. They had learned long ago that eye contact during these visits was a death sentence. The only sounds were the crackling of torches and the distant howling of wind through the pine trees. Blackwood stepped into the cramped quarters, his cane tapping against the wooden floor with each deliberate step. The space, designed to hold 6 men, was packed with 10, their bodies pressed together on straw mattresses that reeked of sweat and desperation. "Now then," Blackwood continued, beginning his slow walk between the pallets, "I need a volunteer for tonight's festivities, someone brave enough to provide entertainment for my distinguished guests." He paused beside old Moses, studying the elderly man's weathered face. Moses kept his eyes downcast, his breathing shallow. Blackwood moved on, his cane trailing behind him like the tail of a predator. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've been thinking about the nature of courage. What makes one man fight while another surrenders? What separates the wolf from the sheep?" Samuel lay perfectly still, his massive frame taking up nearly twice the space of the other men. He could feel Blackwood's presence approaching, could smell the governor's expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of cruelty. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, but he forced himself to remain motionless. "Ah," Blackwood said, stopping directly beside Samuel's pallet. "Here we have something interesting." The governor's cane came to rest on Samuel's shoulder, the ivory handle cold against his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt. Samuel could feel the eyes of every man in the room upon him, could hear the barely audible intake of breath from his fellow prisoners. "Stand up," Blackwood commanded. Samuel rose slowly, unfolding his massive frame until he towered over everyone in the room. Even Blackwood, who was tall for his time at 6 feet, had to crane his neck to look into Samuel's face. The governor's guests murmured among themselves, impressed despite their casual cruelty. "Magnificent," Blackwood breathed, walking in a slow circle around Samuel like a buyer examining livestock. "Look at the size of him, gentlemen, the muscle definition, the way he carries himself." Judge Whitmore stepped forward, his small eyes glittering with interest. "He's certainly substantial, but size can be a disadvantage in the forest, makes one easier to track." "Perhaps," Blackwood replied, never taking his eyes off Samuel, "but it also makes the hunt more sporting. Tell me, boy, what's your name?" "Samuel, sir," he replied, his voice deep and steady. "Samuel," Blackwood repeated, savoring the name. "And where did you come from before arriving at my plantation?" "Alabama, sir, the Thornfield plantation." "Ah, yes, Thornfield. I heard it went under. Poor management, from what I understand. Their loss is my gain." Blackwood's smile was razor-sharp. "Tell me, Samuel, do you know why I'm here tonight?" Samuel met the governor's gaze for just a moment, long enough to let Blackwood see that he was not dealing with a broken man, but not long enough to be considered defiant. "Yes, sir. And what do you think of my little game?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Every man in the room held his breath. This was the moment when most selected prisoners would beg, would plead for mercy, would promise anything to avoid their fate. Samuel's response was different. "I think," he said slowly, his voice carrying a weight that made even Blackwood's guests shift uncomfortably, "that every game has rules, sir, and every game can be won or lost." Blackwood's eyes widened slightly. In all his years of conducting these hunts, no one had ever responded with such composure. The other prisoners had always broken down, had wept or raged or begged. This giant stood before him like a mountain, unmovable and unafraid. "Fascinating," Blackwood murmured. "You speak as if you believe you have a chance." "Every man has a chance, sir, until he doesn't." Senator Morrison laughed nervously. "Thaddeus, this one seems different." Perhaps we should choose someone more traditional. But Blackwood was transfixed. This was exactly what he had been hoping for, a worthy adversary, someone whose defeat would be truly satisfying. No, gentlemen, this is perfect. This is what we've been waiting for. He turned to address the room. The rest of you listen carefully. Your friend Samuel here has volunteered to participate in tonight's hunt. You will remain in your quarters until dawn. Anyone found outside will join him in the forest. Is that understood? A chorus of "Yes, sir" filled the cramped space. Blackwood turned back to Samuel. You have 30 minutes from the time we release you at the forest edge. If you can reach the old stone bridge 5 miles north before dawn, you win your freedom. If we catch you... He let the sentence hang unfinished. I understand, sir. Excellent. Oh, and Samuel, just to make things interesting, I'm doubling the stakes tonight. If you somehow manage to evade us until dawn, I'll free not just you, but every man in this room. The gasps from the other prisoners were audible. Old Moses looked up for the first time, his eyes wide with disbelief. Blackwood had never offered such terms before. And if I don't make it to the bridge? Samuel asked. Blackwood's smile was pure evil. Then your friends here will work double shifts for the next month, as punishment for harboring such a spirited individual. It was psychological warfare at its most refined. Blackwood was ensuring that Samuel would carry the weight of 10 men suffering on his shoulders, that every step he took in the forest would be burdened by the knowledge that his failure would bring misery to the only people in the world who cared about him. But if Blackwood expected this revelation to break Samuel's composure, he was disappointed. The giant simply nodded once, accepting the terms as if they were discussing the weather. Very well, Blackwood said, stepping back. Gentlemen, shall we prepare for the hunt? As the governor and his guests filed out of the quarters, Samuel felt a hand touch his arm. Old Moses had risen from his pallet. His weathered face creased with worry. Boy, Moses whispered, you don't have to do this. There might be another way. There is no other way, Samuel replied quietly. There never was. But the bridge. No one's ever made it to the bridge. Samuel looked down at the old man, and for the first time that night he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Moses, I'm not running to the bridge. Before the old man could ask what he meant, Samuel was being led away by the overseers, his massive frame disappearing into the night. Behind him, the quarters fell silent, except for the sound of 10 men praying to a god who seemed to have forgotten their existence. Outside, Blackwood's hunting party was making final preparations. The bloodhounds were being brought from their kennels, their excited barking echoing across the plantation grounds. Rifles were being loaded, horses saddled, and torches lit. Samuel was led to the edge of the forest, where a crude wooden post marked the starting point of Blackwood's hunting ground. The governor approached on his black stallion, looking down at his chosen prey with the satisfaction of a man about to enjoy his favorite meal. "Any last words, Samuel?" Blackwood asked. Samuel looked up at the mounted figure, then turned his gaze to the dark forest beyond. When he spoke, his voice carried across the night air with the weight of prophecy. "Yes, sir, I have something to say." He turned back to face Blackwood, and in that moment, something shifted in the air between them. The governor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. "Tonight," Samuel said, his words measured and deliberate, "you're going to learn the difference between hunting animals and hunting a man who has nothing left to lose." Blackwood's confident smile faltered for just an instant before returning full force. "We shall see. Your 30 minutes begin now." Samuel turned and walked into the forest without looking back, his massive frame swallowed by the darkness between the trees. Behind him, Blackwood checked his pocket watch and settled in to wait, unaware that he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. The hunt was about to begin. But for the first time in Governor Thaddeus Blackwood's twisted career, he was not the only predator in the forest. Samuel moved through the forest like a shadow given substance, his massive frame navigating the dense undergrowth with surprising grace. Unlike the previous victims of Blackwood's hunts, he did not run in panic toward the distant bridge. Instead, he moved with purpose, following a route he had memorized during months of careful observation. The 30-minute head start was not a gift, it was a weapon, and Samuel intended to use every second of it. He made his way to a small creek that wound through the heart of the hunting ground, following its banks until he reached a fallen oak tree that had been struck by lightning the previous spring. Here, hidden beneath the massive trunk, was his cache, the knife he had crafted, wrapped in oiled cloth, along with several strips of dried meat he had saved from his meager rations. But more importantly, this was where Samuel's real plan began. He had spent months studying not just the forest, but Blackwood himself. The governor was a creature of habit, following the same hunting patterns, using the same tactics, making the same assumptions. Blackwood believed that fear made his prey predictable, but he had never considered that intelligence could make a hunter predictable as well. Samuel knew that Blackwood would release the dogs first, following their trail on horseback while his guests spread out to cut off escape routes. The governor always positioned himself at the center of the hunt, directing his men like pieces on a chessboard. It was a strategy that had never failed him. Tonight, it would be his downfall. Samuel began implementing the first phase of his plan, misdirection. He backtracked along the creek, leaving clear footprints in the muddy bank before wading into the water and moving upstream. At a rocky outcropping, he climbed out and deliberately broke several branches, creating an obvious trail leading north toward the bridge. But this was a deception. While the dogs would follow this false trail, Samuel doubled back through the water, covering his scent and emerging at a point that would put him behind Blackwood's hunting party. The sound of baying hounds echoed through the forest as the 30 minutes expired. Samuel could hear the thunder of hoofbeats and the shouts of men as the hunt began in earnest. From his concealed position in a thicket of mountain laurel, he watched the torches move through the trees like malevolent stars. "There!" Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the night air. "The dogs have picked up the scent. He's heading north, just as I predicted. Henderson, take your men and circle around to the bridge. Morrison, cover the eastern approach. The rest of you, follow me." Samuel smiled grimly as the hunting party split up exactly as he had anticipated. Blackwood was so confident in his methods that he never considered the possibility of being outmaneuvered by his prey. As the main group moved away, following the false trail, Samuel began to move. But he was not fleeing, he was stalking. Judge Whitmore had been assigned to guard the southern approach, positioned alone near a small clearing where Blackwood believed Samuel might try to circle back. The judge sat on his horse, rifle across his saddle, occasionally taking swigs from a silver flask to ward off the October chill. He never saw Samuel coming. The giant emerged from the darkness like a force of nature, moving with impossible silence for a man of his size. One massive hand clamped over Whitmore's mouth while the other dragged him from his horse. The judge's rifle clattered to the ground as Samuel's knife found its mark with surgical precision. Whitmore's eyes went wide with shock and terror as he realized that the hunted had become the hunter. His last sight was Samuel's face, calm and resolute, showing no more emotion than a man chopping firewood. Samuel caught the judge's body as it fell, lowering it silently to the ground. He took Whitmore's rifle, ammunition, and horse, leaving the corpse hidden in the underbrush. The judge's mount was a fine bay gelding, well-trained and responsive, exactly what Samuel needed for the next phase of his plan. Meanwhile, Blackwood's main party was discovering that their quarry was more cunning than anticipated. The dogs had followed the false trail to a rocky area where the scent disappeared completely. The hounds ran in circles, whining in confusion as their handlers cursed and tried to pick up the trail again. "Impossible," Blackwood muttered, studying the ground by torchlight. "No man can simply vanish." "Or perhaps he went into the water," suggested one of his overseers. "Then the dogs would have found where he came out. No, this is something else. This man is thinking." For the first time in years of conducting these hunts, Blackwood felt a flicker of unease. His previous victims had been driven by terror, making them predictable and easy to track. But this Samuel was displaying a level of tactical thinking that the governor had not anticipated. "Spread out," Blackwood ordered. "Search every inch of this area. He has to be somewhere nearby." As his men dispersed with their torches, Blackwood remained mounted in the center of the clearing, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning the tree line. The governor was beginning to realize that he might have underestimated his prey, but his arrogance prevented him from grasping the true extent of his miscalculation. Samuel was no longer the hunted. He was the apex predator in these woods, and Blackwood's men were walking into a carefully laid trap. From his position on the stolen horse, Samuel could see the scattered torches of the search party. He had positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the clearing, using the elevation and darkness to his advantage. The rifle felt familiar in his hands. His father had taught him to shoot during their years of freedom in Pennsylvania, and muscle memory guided his movements as he checked the weapon's load. He could have shot Blackwood from this position, ending the hunt with a single bullet, but that would have been too quick, too merciful. Samuel wanted the governor to understand what it felt like to be prey, to experience the terror that so many innocent people had felt in their final moments. Instead, Samuel chose a different target. The overseer named Briggs was searching alone near the base of the ridge, his torch held high as he examined the ground for tracks. Samuel's shot took him in the chest, the rifle's report echoing through the forest like thunder. Briggs fell without a sound, his torch guttering out in the damp earth. The remaining men froze at the sound of gunfire, their heads turning toward the ridge where a muzzle flash had briefly illuminated the darkness. "He's armed," someone shouted. "The bastard's got a gun!" Panic began to spread through the hunting party. These men were accustomed to pursuing unarmed, terrified victims through the forest. The idea that their prey might be shooting back had never occurred to them. Blackwood's voice cut through the confusion like a whip. "Calm yourselves. It's just one man with one shot. Reload and advance. We have him cornered." But Samuel was already moving, using the chaos to relocate to a new position. He had studied these men for months, knew their strengths and weaknesses, their fears and motivations. Most of Blackwood's overseers were bullies and cowards who derived their courage from overwhelming odds and helpless victims. When faced with genuine danger, they would break. Samuel's second shot came from a completely different angle, taking down another overseer who had been trying to flank his previous position. The man screamed as he fell, the sound echoing through the trees like the cry of a wounded animal. "Where is he?" Henderson shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "How is he moving so fast?" "He's on horseback," Blackwood realized, his tactical mind finally grasping the situation. He took Whitmore's horse. That's how he's repositioning so quickly. The governor's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. If Samuel had Whitmore's horse, that meant. "Find Judge Whitmore," Blackwood commanded. "Now!" But Samuel was already implementing the next phase of his plan. He had dismounted and was moving on foot again, using the forest's natural cover to approach the hunting party from yet another angle. The rifle was useful, but for what he intended to do next, he needed to be close. Very close. The overseer named Caldwell was crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle trained on the tree line where he thought Samuel might appear. He never looked behind him, never considered that death might approach from the rear. Samuel's knife slid between Caldwell's ribs, like a whisper, finding the heart with the precision of a surgeon. The man died without making a sound, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. 3 down, 4 to go, plus Blackwood himself. The governor was beginning to understand that he was no longer in control of the situation. His carefully orchestrated hunt had become a nightmare, with his own men being picked off one by a quarry who had somehow transformed into an avenging angel of death. "Regroup," Blackwood shouted into the darkness. "Fall back to the clearing. We make our stand together." But Samuel had anticipated this as well. As the surviving members of the hunting party tried to retreat to the safety of numbers, they found their path blocked by a wall of flame. Samuel had used the time during their confusion to set fire to the dry underbrush, creating a barrier that forced them to take a longer route back to the clearing, a route that led directly through Samuel's killing ground. The giant waited in the darkness, his knife ready, as the first of Blackwood's men stumbled into his trap. The overseer named Jackson never saw the blade that opened his throat, never had time to cry out a warning to his companions. By the time the survivors reached the clearing, only 3 men remained alive. Blackwood himself and 2 of his overseers, their faces pale with terror in the flickering torchlight. "This is impossible," one of them whispered. "He's just one man. How can one man do this?" Blackwood's jaw was clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. His perfect hunt had become a slaughter, and he was no longer the predator. For the first time in his life, Governor Thaddeus Blackwood was experiencing genuine fear. "He's not just a man," Blackwood said quietly, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "He's something else entirely." From the darkness beyond the clearing, Samuel's voice emerged like the rumble of distant thunder. "Governor Blackwood." The 3 men spun toward the sound, their rifles raised, but they could see nothing beyond the circle of torchlight. "I want to thank you," Samuel continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "For 12 years, I've carried the weight of my parents' death, the burden of my lost freedom. Tonight, you've given me the chance to set that burden down. Show yourself." Blackwood shouted into the darkness. "Face me like a man." Samuel's laughter was like the sound of breaking chains. "Like a man? You mean the way you faced all those innocent people you murdered for sport? The way you gave them a fair chance to defend themselves? They were property, slaves, they had no rights. And what are you now, Governor? What are you? Alone in the dark with death coming for you. Are you still the master, or have you become the slave?" The psychological warfare was devastating. Blackwood could feel his remaining men's resolve crumbling, could see the terror in their eyes as they realized that their positions had been completely reversed. "I'll make you a deal," Samuel's voice continued. "Send your men away. Face me alone, and I'll give you the same chance you gave all those innocent people, 30 minutes to reach safety. What do you say, Governor? Are you brave enough to play your own game?" Blackwood's hands were shaking now, though whether from rage or fear he couldn't tell. Everything he had built, everything he had taken pride in, was crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Never," he snarled. "I am Governor Thaddeus Blackwood. I bow to no one, especially not to some escaped slave." "Then you've made your choice," Samuel replied. And there was something final in his voice, like the closing of a coffin lid. The attack came from 3 directions at once, so fast and coordinated that it seemed impossible for one man to execute. Samuel had used the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to position himself for a final, devastating assault. The first overseer died with Samuel's knife in his back before he could turn around. The second managed to fire one wild shot before the giant's massive hands closed around his throat, crushing his windpipe like a dry twig. And then there was only Blackwood, alone in the clearing with his rifle, facing the man he had chosen as prey. Samuel stepped into the circle of torchlight, and Blackwood saw him clearly for the first time that night. The giant's clothes were torn and stained with blood, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire clearing, but it was his eyes that made Blackwood's blood freeze. They held no anger, no rage, no emotion at all. They were the eyes of justice incarnate, cold and implacable as winter. "Hello, Governor," Samuel said quietly. "It's time to finish our game." Governor Thaddeus Blackwood stood alone in the flickering torchlight, his ornate rifle trembling in his hands as he faced the giant who had systematically destroyed his hunting party. The clearing that had once been his domain now felt like a tomb, surrounded by the bodies of his men and the weight of his own mortality. Samuel approached slowly, deliberately, his massive frame moving with the inexorable certainty of an avalanche. The knife in his hand caught the torchlight, its blade still wet with the blood of Blackwood's overseers. "You know," Samuel said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about courage, about what separates the wolf from the sheep." Blackwood raised his rifle, his finger finding the trigger. "Stay back, I'm warning you." "The thing is," Samuel continued, ignoring the weapon pointed at his chest, "I think you had it backwards. You see, a wolf hunts to survive. A wolf kills to feed its family, to protect its territory. What you've been doing, that's not the behavior of a wolf." "I said stay back." Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip, but there was desperation in it now, the sound of a man whose world was collapsing around him. Samuel stopped just outside the rifle's effective range, his dark eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "That's the behavior of something much worse. Something that kills for pleasure, that feeds on suffering. You want to know what that makes you, Governor?" Blackwood pulled the trigger. The rifle's report echoed through the forest like thunder, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the clearing in stark detail. But when the smoke cleared, Samuel was no longer where he had been standing. The giant had moved with impossible speed for a man of his size, rolling to the side and using the momentary blindness caused by the muzzle flash to close the distance. Blackwood frantically tried to reload, his hand shaking as he fumbled with powder and shot. But Samuel was already upon him, one massive hand closing around the rifle's barrel and wrenching it from the governor's grasp. "It makes you a monster," Samuel finished, his voice calm despite the violence of the moment. Blackwood stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the pistol at his belt, but Samuel's knife was already at his throat. The governor froze, feeling the cold steel against his skin, knowing that one wrong move would open his jugular. "Please," Blackwood whispered, and the word tasted like ashes in his mouth. "I can pay you. Gold, land, anything you want. I can give you papers, make you a free man legally. Just, please." Samuel studied the governor's face in the torchlight, seeing the fear, the desperation, the complete collapse of the arrogant man who had terrorized so many innocent people. For a moment, something almost like pity flickered in the giant's eyes. "You know what's interesting about fear, Governor? It does make people predictable. Right now, you're doing exactly what every one of your victims did. You're begging for mercy from someone who has no reason to give it." "I was wrong," Blackwood said, tears streaming down his face. "I see that now. What I did was evil, monstrous. I'll change, I swear it. I'll free all my slaves, "You'll say anything to live another minute," Samuel interrupted, "just like they did. The difference is, they were innocent. They deserved mercy." The knife pressed closer to Blackwood's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "But you're going to die tonight, Governor. The only question is how." Blackwood's eyes went wide with terror. What do you mean?" Samuel smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Blackwood had ever seen. "I'm going to give you the same choice you gave all those people. You can run." "What? Run?" Samuel repeated, stepping back and lowering the knife. "You have until dawn to reach safety. If you can make it to your mansion, if you can get past me, you live. If not—" Blackwood stared at him in disbelief. "You're You're letting me go? I'm giving you a chance. The same chance you gave them. Of course, there are a few differences. Samuel's smile widened. You're not in your own forest anymore, Governor. This is my territory now, and unlike your victims, I know exactly how you think, how you move, where you'll try to hide. The psychological impact was devastating. Blackwood realized that Samuel was not offering him mercy. He was offering him the most refined form of torture imaginable. The governor would spend his final hours experiencing the same terror, the same hopelessness that he had inflicted on so many others. Also, Samuel added casually, I should mention that I sent your guests away earlier. What? When? While you were busy hunting shadows in the forest, I paid a visit to your mansion. Senator Morrison, Judge Whitmore's friends, all those fine gentlemen who came to watch your little show. I explained to them that the entertainment was over, that they should leave immediately if they valued their lives. Blackwood's face went pale. You're lying. Am I? Why don't you run back to the mansion and see for yourself? Of course, you'll have to get past me first. The governor looked around the clearing, at the bodies of his men, at the dying torches that would soon leave him in complete darkness. The weight of his situation finally sank in completely. He was alone, unarmed, and being hunted by a man who had already proven himself to be a far superior predator. This isn't possible, Blackwood whispered. You're just a slave, just property. This can't be happening. Property? Samuel's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. Governor, let me tell you what I really am. I'm the son of free people who built their own farm with their own hands. I'm a man who learned to read and write, who studied mathematics and philosophy. I'm someone who spent 12 years planning for this moment, learning everything I could about you and men like you. He stepped closer, and Blackwood could see the intelligence burning in those dark eyes, the careful calculation that had orchestrated this entire night. Most importantly, Samuel continued, I'm the last thing you're ever going to see. So I suggest you start running, Governor. Dawn is still hours away, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of this hunt. Blackwood broke. The governor turned and fled into the forest, crashing through the underbrush like a panicked animal. Behind him, Samuel's laughter followed, like the baying of hounds, echoing through the trees and filling the night with the sound of justice finally served. For the next 3 hours, Governor Thaddeus Blackwood experienced hell on earth. Every shadow might hide his pursuer, every snapping twig might signal his doom. Samuel stalked him through the forest with the patience of a natural predator, appearing just long enough to be seen before vanishing again into the darkness. The governor tried every trick he had learned during his years of hunting, but Samuel anticipated them all. When Blackwood tried to hide in a hollow log, Samuel's knife appeared inches from his face. When he attempted to cross the creek to throw off his scent, Samuel was waiting on the other side, getting tired. Governor? Samuel's voice would emerge from the darkness, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always terrifying. Your victims never got to rest. They ran until their hearts burst, until their feet bled, until they collapsed from exhaustion. How does it feel? Blackwood's fine hunting clothes were torn to shreds, his face scratched and bleeding from thorns. His expensive boots had fallen apart, leaving his feet raw and bloody. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological torture of knowing that death was stalking him, playing with him like a cat with a mouse. As dawn approached, Blackwood found himself back where the nightmare had begun, at the edge of the forest, near the wooden post that marked the starting point of his hunting ground. He could see his mansion in the distance, its windows dark and empty. Samuel had been telling the truth. His guests were gone, fled into the night like the cowards they truly were. Almost made it, Samuel's voice said behind him. Blackwood spun around to find the giant standing just at the tree line, his massive frame silhouetted against the lightening sky. The governor was so exhausted he could barely stand, his legs shaking with fatigue and terror. "Please," Blackwood gasped, "I've learned my lesson. I'll never hunt again, I swear it. I'll free every slave on my plantation. I'll give you anything you want." Samuel walked slowly toward him, and Blackwood could see that the giant was completely calm, not even breathing hard despite the night-long chase. "You know what I want, Governor? I want you to understand something." "What?" "Anything. I want you to understand that this was never about the hunt. This was about justice, about balance, about making sure that the evil you've done in this world doesn't go unpunished." Samuel reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it he withdrew a piece of paper, yellowed with age and carefully preserved. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, holding the paper up to the dawn light. Blackwood squinted at it, trying to make out the faded writing. I don't. These are my freedom papers," Samuel said quietly. "The documents that proved I was born, a free man, that I had every right to live my life in peace with my family. Your slave catchers burned the originals, but my father had hidden a copy." He folded the paper carefully and put it back in the pouch. "For 12 years, I've carried this reminder of what I lost, what was stolen from me. Tonight I'm finally free to let it go." "Then let me go too," Blackwood pleaded. "We can both be free. We can both start over." Samuel shook his head sadly. "Governor, you still don't understand. Some things can't be forgiven. Some debts can only be paid in blood." The knife appeared in Samuel's hand as if by magic, its blade catching the first rays of the rising sun. Blackwood tried to run, but his exhausted legs betrayed him, and he fell to his knees in the damp grass. "Wait!" he gasped. "Wait! I have information about other plantations, other men who do what I do. I can help you stop them." Samuel paused, considering this. "Other men like you?" "Yes. Senator Morrison has his own hunting ground in South Carolina. Judge Whitmore's brother runs similar games in Alabama. I can give you names, locations, everything." For a moment, hope flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Perhaps he had found a way to save himself, to turn his knowledge into a bargaining chip for his life. Samuel knelt down beside the governor, bringing his face close to Blackwood's ear. "Thank you for that information," he whispered. "It will be very useful." "Then you'll let me live?" "No," Samuel said simply. "But now I know where to go next." The knife slid between Blackwood's ribs with surgical precision, finding the heart just as it had with so many of the governor's men. Blackwood's eyes went wide with shock, then slowly glazed over as his life ebbed away. Samuel stood over the body as the sun rose fully above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, he could hear the sound of voices, the enslaved people of Ravenshollow emerging from their quarters, drawn by the silence where there should have been the sounds of returning hunters. Old Moses was the first to reach the edge of the forest, his weathered face creased with worry and hope in equal measure. When he saw Samuel standing over Blackwood's corpse, the old man's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Samuel," Moses whispered, "you did it. You actually did it." "It's finished," Samuel replied, wiping the blood from his knife on Blackwood's expensive jacket. "The monster is dead." More people arrived. Men, women, and children who had lived in terror of Blackwood's hunts, who had watched friends and family members disappear into the forest never to return. They stood in stunned silence, unable to believe that their tormentor was truly gone. "What happens now?" asked a young woman named Sarah, her voice barely audible. Samuel looked at the assembled group, these people who had suffered so much for so long. "Now you're free," he said simply. "All of you. The papers in Blackwood's study will prove ownership of this plantation, but those papers died with him. This land belongs to no one now but those who work it." "And you?" Moses asked. "What will you do?" Samuel looked toward the horizon, where other plantations lay hidden beyond the rolling hills. "I have work to do, other monsters to hunt, other debts to collect." He turned back to the group one final time. "Make this place into something good. Build the kind of life that Blackwood tried to steal from all of us. And remember, no one is property, no one is prey. We are all human beings, and we all deserve to be free." With that, Samuel walked away from Raven's Hollow plantation, disappearing into the morning mist like a legend come to life. Behind him, the people he had freed began the long work of building new lives from the ashes of their oppression. And in the distance, on plantations across the South, other men like Blackwood continued their evil games, unaware that justice was coming for them in the form of a 7-foot giant who had learned that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something even more terrifying. The hunt was over, but Samuel's war had just begun. In the years that followed, stories spread across the South of a giant who appeared in the night, a phantom of justice who hunted those who preyed upon the innocent. Some called him a myth, others a nightmare made flesh. But those who had suffered under the cruelty of men like Blackwood knew the truth, that sometimes, when evil seems unstoppable, the universe sends someone to restore the balance. Samuel's story reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite that fear. That justice delayed is not always justice denied. And that no matter how powerful evil may seem, it can never truly defeat the human spirit. If this story of courage against impossible odds moved you, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest times, justice can prevail. What other untold stories of resistance and courage would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below. Remember, history is full of heroes whose names were never written in books, whose courage was never celebrated in songs. But their legacy lives on in every person who refuses to bow to injustice, who stands up for the powerless, who believes that one person can make a difference. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.